for joining me today. We are going to be starting a few weeks in Hosea today. So let's go ahead and pray as we get started. God, thank you so much for today, and thank you for your word. And I just pray that you'll speak to our hearts as we read your word and study it together, God. I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are moving right along to Hosea. It's a little bit out of order, at least in how the books are. We've been in Amos, and we've been in Jonah, and now we're going backwards in the Bible to Hosea. It's actually the first book in the book of the 12, or the minor prophets, as we often have heard them called. And before we dive in and talk about this passage, or these 3 chapters, I wanted to take a few minutes and give a little background and introductory material for Hosea as a whole. Now, Hosea, the prophet, we actually don't know a whole lot about him. We have very little actually about him in the text. We have Hosea 1:1 says, "The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel." So in addition to this verse that kind of sets him in context and a time period, we also have a little bit of information about his family, his wife, and we'll get into that here in just a few minutes when we start talking about chapter 1. But let's look back at verse 1, and it says that he was the son of Beeri, and he prophesied during the reigns of Uzziah, and it lists all the way through Hezekiah, and then Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. So it sets him as a kind of close contemporary of Amos, not exactly the same time. Scholars think that he probably prophesied about 20 years after Amos, but probably would have been close enough. And Hosea's message is directed to the northern kingdom of Israel. And the interesting thing about that is that unlike Amos, scholars believe that Hosea was actually from the northern kingdom. So Amos was from Judah and came to the north to preach, but Hosea was most likely from the northern part in the northern kingdom of Israel. So scholars have deduced from the actual text of Hosea that Hosea was most likely from the northern kingdom, and that is because of the very distinct northern Hebrew dialect that we have here in Hosea. Now, it doesn't come out in English, but scholars of Hebrew would be able to tell you more about what that is. And so it makes the actual text of Hosea a different challenge to translate into English. And so that's why you'll see some variation among different English translation on some various passages in Hosea. And so that is one of the distinctive things about Hosea, is that it has, in the Hebrew, it has distinctive vocabulary and grammar that is unique to that dialect. And it does make translating into English a little bit more difficult than maybe other parts of the Old Testament. But if you want to kind of get a good picture of what scholars think about different words that are unique to Hosea, read several different English translations, and you'll get a good picture for what the spectrum is. So concerning the actual message here in Hosea, we are going to see messages of destruction, but also, unlike Amos, we're going to see a lot more hope and blessing kind of messages. So there's definitely this overarching theme that there is great destruction and judgment coming because of Israel's sin. But we also have the note of restoration, that there's going to be a restoration in the future, in the distant future. So unlike Jonah, there's not okay, turn right now and the destruction's not going to come. No, the destruction's coming because Israel's broken its covenant. But there is the note of restoration. And it's interesting because as you read through Hosea, the messages of hope are kind of woven in there. It's not, here's a whole big section of one and then a whole big section of other. You'll have a section that's very much judgment oriented, and then maybe a couple verses that bring up that point of hope or that point of restoration. Another thing that is distinct about Hosea's message is that Hosea is known for his bold use of imagery, very vivid language to describe this break in a relationship between God and Israel, and how Israel has broken their covenant relationship with God. And one of the most famous images or metaphors that Hosea uses is Israel as an adulteress, and using they're saying that sin is prostitution, and using that as a metaphor. And we're going to see that today, but there are tons of other images. So as you are reading through Hosea, take note of how Hosea is describing the nature of Israel's sin and the nature of the brokenness of the relationship with God. And it's very interesting, and it's very unique, and very thought-provoking and attention-grabbing. So one other note before we dive into our passage for today is, as we're reading through, I mentioned we'll see messages of judgment. We'll also see messages of hope, but we also have it's kind of three different types of material that we'll see. So we'll have evidence or accusations, like God is laying out this evidence against the people of Israel and how they have broken the covenant. And then we see curses or judgment for that, for their breaking the covenant, for the sins that they have committed, and then hope and blessings. And if we couch all of this in, it's very interesting to read. We've read several times in Deuteronomy. At the end of Deuteronomy 28 through 30, we'll see the curses for breaking the covenant. And Hosea very much reads like that, in the sense that here's what's going to happen because Israel did these things. And before we start off here today reading in our passage, I wanted to set up our entire study by reading a short passage in Deuteronomy 4. And I know I just sent you to do the end of Deuteronomy, but I do want to read this passage in Deuteronomy 4. So at this point in Deuteronomy, Moses is talking to the people of Israel, and they have not yet crossed into the promised land, but they are standing right there at the cusp, getting ready to. And so Moses is giving them some instructions. And this is in Deuteronomy 4, and I'm going to start reading in verse 23. And actually, I'm going to start reading in verse 22. And Moses says, "I will die in this land. I will not cross the Jordan, but you are about to cross over and take possession of that good land. Be careful not to forget the covenant of the Lord your God that he made with you. Do not make for yourselves an idol in the form of anything the Lord your God has forbidden. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. After you have had children and grandchildren and have lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any kind of idol, doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God and arousing his anger, I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you this day, that you will quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not live there long, but will certainly be destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and only a few of you will survive among the nations to which the Lord will drive you. There you will worship man-made gods of wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or eat or smell. But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have happened to you, then in later days you will return to the Lord your God and obey him. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed to them by oath." So with that in mind, we are going to begin our study of Hosea. It's very much, as we read through Hosea, we are going to see how he is laying out how Israel has in fact breached the covenant. They have broken the covenant that they made with God at Mount Sinai. And they are now reaping the consequences for that. But then the message of hope, we heard the message of hope in Deuteronomy 4 that Moses said, when you turn, God will restore you. And we're going to hear that message even today as we begin our study of Hosea. So we are going to turn now to Hosea 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to look at parts of all of this. Our curriculum zeroes in on just the narrative portions in 1 and 3, and kind of skips over chapter 2. But we are going to do our best to talk about parts of all 3 chapters. In Hosea 1, 2, and 3, we are going to see the marriage metaphors on full display. So Hosea uses these to depict the problems between God and Israel. And we will see, as we already talked about, we're going to see those messages of hope woven in with the messages of destruction and the accusations and evidence that is laid out. So each one of these chapters, 1, 2, and 3, is going to portray a marriage metaphor a little bit different way. They're each distinct, but they also overlap each other. So we're going to start off in chapter 1. We've already talked about 1:1, so we're going to start in verse 2, and I'm going to read 2 through 11. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. And that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved. For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, but by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them." After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, "Call him Lo Ami, which means not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, 'You are not my people,' they will be called children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. They will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel." So I don't know about you, but whenever I read this and I hear what God said to Hosea and what he asked him to do, I'm just like, really? And it just reminds me of all the times that God has his prophets do some pretty crazy things. We read Ezekiel. He had to lay on his side for quite a while and cook food laying on his side and building this model of Jerusalem and a siege and all sorts of things. And Isaiah had to do some different things. A lot of these were very much sign actions. So their actions were supposed to be indicative of some sort of prophetic message. And we see that here with Hosea. So God is telling Hosea, go and marry a promiscuous woman. Go and marry a prostitute and have children with her. It's interesting because as I was reading this week, and I read several commentaries, and you'll be able to see which ones I read down in the description. That way, if you want to look up some of this information for yourself, you can. But as I was reading this week, several of the commentaries pointed out that by having Hosea marry a prostitute, a promiscuous woman, that he was then going to be able to better understand how God was feeling, God's pain and God's love for his people. For having this woman who was not fully devoted to him, how God was feeling about Israel and how Israel was sitting against him. And I think that's very interesting that how they were unfaithful, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, unfaithful to God, just like Gomer was going to be unfaithful to Hosea. And so it was like his very life was going to be lived out as a way to express this relationship between God and Israel. And that's definitely some commitment to following exactly what God is calling you to do. And we see prophets do it over and over and over again. But it makes what Jonah had to do look a little bit more appealing, at least to me. Maybe not. I don't know. I wasn't alive then. I don't know about the Assyrians. They were pretty bad, but I don't know. Given the choice, I think I'd rather go to Nineveh. All right, then it says the Lord, then not only is he going to marry Gomer, they're going to have kids, but then you're also going to have to give your kids some weird names. And you're going to name your kids Not Loved and Not My People. So even their children were going to be part of this whole thing. It's just very interesting. and very far outside of our realm of experience. But I think it's so important as we think about this, because the names of the kids, of the children, symbolize God's anger with Israel. And they convey the judgment that is coming and how the people of Israel have broken their covenant relationship with God. We read part of what Moses said back in Deuteronomy would happen, and if they started to worship other gods. And here God is saying they've been worshiping other gods and they've been unfaithful to me, and this is a symbol of that. And so we have Jezreel, which is a little bit, it means God sows, but it instead of God sowing like seed or good things, it's God sowing judgment. Then we have Lo Ruhama, not loved or not pitied, not loved, not shown compassion. And then Lo Ami, which was not my people. And both of these are going to be reversed later on in chapter 2. And I think it's very interesting. So it's going to be going from not loved to loved, and not my people to my people. And that's in 2:23. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a little bit. And then at the end of this section, we have a message of hope. So we have this note of judgment, but then it closes with a message of hope. And it brings up imagery from Genesis and the patriarchs. Numbering the Israelites, they'll be like the sand on the seashore. It cannot be measured or counted. And if we were to look up in Genesis 22, I'm going to flip there really quickly. This would be the time of the patriarchs. And we have Abraham in 22 verse 17 says, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. And then he goes on and talks about other things that are going to happen because Abraham has a unique relationship with God. So this is calling up that same imagery. So at the moment of saying that God is going to essentially disinherit his people, they are not going to be his people anymore. He says, but they're also going to be like the sand on the seashore that cannot be counted or measured. And then they're going to be called children of the living God. And that it's very interesting how we have this message of hope at the end of this section that is very much very destruction focused. So let's go ahead and keep going though. We have another marriage metaphor here in chapter 2. And I don't think we're going to read all of this one, but I did want to summarize a little bit about what is going on here. So in chapter 2, in the first part, so 2 to 13, we have the land, so Israel being personified as God's wife, essentially. And so it's another marriage metaphor. And so it's going to go through and it's going to talk about how adulterous Israel has been towards God. And it talks about how, so there's a whole bunch of very vivid language. And you should definitely read it because it's very attention grabbing. But so here God is the speaker, and he is being portrayed as the scorned husband, and also a bit of a prosecuting attorney who's laying out evidence. So this section and 2 through 13 is very much going to be evidence. So let's look down here. It says in verse 5, it says, their mother has been unfaithful, and she has conceived them in disgrace. I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water. And it says, and so then it says in verse 6, God says, I will block her path with thorn bushes. Like I'm going to wall her in and try to keep her with me. She would chase after her lovers, but not catch them. And then she will say, I'll go back to my husband as at first. But she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold which they used for Baal. Therefore, I will take away my grain when it ripens. So this imagery of God bestowing these gifts on the people of Israel that they in turn used to worship other gods. So they used the grain and the new wine and the oil and the silver and the gold to worship false gods and idols. So this accusation being laid out. And then God saying he's going to take back the wine and the grain and the wool and the linen and all of these things and stop all of her celebrations. That's in verse 11, and her festivals and her new moons and Sabbath days and all her appointed festivals. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were her pay from her lovers. I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot, declares the Lord. And so that ended verse 13. And so this is very, very accusatory. This is what's happened. Israel has worshipped other gods. And so at this point, we're waiting for the hammer to drop, right? What's going to happen as a result of this? Where the judgment is coming, right? And then we get to verse 14. And I'm going to read starting in verse 14. Therefore, I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. And that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. In that day, I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, of the birds in the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground, bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. In that day I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the skies, and they will respond to the earth, and the earth will respond to the grain and the new wine and the olive oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. So we see following the accusations against the unfaithful Israel, God's response of the judgment oracles that we saw. And then we see starting here in verse 14, 15, 16, and following. Not the message we are expecting, right? We are expecting, Israel's messed up, forgotten God, but this message of judgment is followed by God seeking to reconcile and to restore and to revive that relationship with Israel. So the people that are called not my people are going to be called God's people again. And these are promises for the future, for the distant future. So there's still going to be time of judgment and punishment for breaking that covenant and for worshiping those false gods. But God will respond favorably in the future. God will restore that relationship. He will preserve. And I think one of the interesting things that I found interesting, a helpful thing to have pointed out, one of the commentators, scholars pointed out that, remember, this is not a metaphor for human marriage. This is a marriage metaphor for religious infidelity. So we shouldn't read, this is how human marriage is supposed to work, or any of those types of things onto this. This is a portrayal of Israel's complete breaking of the covenant that they had made with God, the one true God. And they were not faithful to him. And so the metaphor is for religious infidelity. It's not the other way around, saying that this is how human marriage is supposed to work or anything like that. I know some people can maybe get confused about that at different times or be very concerned about some of the language that's used in this passage. But I think if we put it in the right context, it makes a lot more sense. And ultimately, I just think the beauty in God restoring Israel when they had so obviously just thumbed their nose at him and said, well, we want to do our own thing. And yet God, in his steadfast, all-consuming love, is going to preserve and continues to be faithful. That is one of the things we see as we read Hosea, is God's faithfulness held up against Israel's unfaithfulness, and how God continues to respond by wanting to restore. So that message of hope is important, even though there is a lot of judgment, a lot of accusations, a lot of evidence for against Israel. Some of the important things about this book is, to me, is just the portrayal of God and how his love is what motivates him. So this brings us to chapter 3, and it's very short. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it, and then we will talk about it. We're back to a narrative section again. So chapter 1 is much more narrative. Chapter 2 is more poetry. And chapter 3 is back to a narrative section. And it's going to be from the first person. And so that's going to distinguish it from chapter 1. So let's go ahead and read it. The Lord said to me, "Go, show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes." So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. Then I told her, "You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way toward you. For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or household gods. Afterward, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They will come trembling to the Lord and to his blessing in the last days." So we see a first-person account of this symbolic prophetic action. God again coming, the word of the Lord coming to Hosea, and he sends him to go and get his wife. And Gomer is not named, it's just his wife here. It says she is loved by another man, so he goes and he has to actually buy her back. But the woman, so Gomer here, is a symbol of the Israelites. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites. I mean, what a picture, right? For Hosea to be going and getting his wife back when she has scorned their relationship, and to come back and to love her like God loves the people of Israel. So there would be restoration between Hosea and his wife, and restoration then between God and Israel. It's a challenging picture in some ways to think about that kind of reconciliation. Complete betrayal, complete breach of a covenant relationship. And to see that restoration and reconciliation. And I can imagine, I mean, Hosea was a prophet, right? So he's doing this with the eyes of the people on him, just like Ezekiel laid out in public on his side, or God didn't let Ezekiel mourn for his wife. I believe it was Ezekiel that he gave that command to. And I mean, these things that God calls his prophets to do are out there for the eyes of the people to watch and to see how is he going to respond. So the people were going to watch this relationship between Hosea and his wife unfold and know that Hosea went and he got her back and took her back. And this is definitely not what this does not line up with what the punishment would have been for adultery. The punishment was death. So it's opposite what you would expect. So he takes her back, and he loves her, and God is going to take Israel back and love Israel. And one other note I wanted to point out here from this first section of Hosea is just this idea that God is going to be the one to restore Israel, and God is going to be the one who's going to make it possible for that to happen. If we looked back in chapter 2, God removing the names of the Baals from her lips and making it to where the names can no longer be invoked, and God making a covenant and betrothing Israel to him. and then going and taking Israel back. We see here in chapter 3 that Israelites will return and seek their God in the last days. So this is still a time in the distant future, but it is a time where God is going to be continuing to act on behalf of the people and bringing them to himself. So as we continue this study of Hosea, we have a few more weeks in Hosea. I encourage you to read through this book. It's a little bit longer. I think there are 12 or 13 chapters by the time we get to the end. Let's see. There are 14 chapters in Hosea. And so we're not going to be able to talk about every single verse, but we will do our best to cover all the sections and maybe even talk about some of the hard passages that we don't always get to talk about. So hopefully you'll join me over these next few weeks as we dig into this very interesting and unique book in the Old Testament. All right, I will see you next week. Bye!